Welcome to The Pause, the key to wisdom, hosted by The Kitchen Table, where we explore ways to respond wisely to life's challenges. If you're looking for ways to navigate life with more maturity, empathy, and insight, you've come to the right place. In our work together, we've discovered a formula for wisdom. It's a do-it-yourself project, so pull up a chair with your co-hosts Greg Coughlin, Ron Medved, and Dave Dirksen as we share our models, practical exercises, and many good stories. Let's get into it.
Welcome everybody to the kitchen table. As you will see, Dave and Ron and I are sitting around, and Ron is enjoying Mexico once again at the real kitchen table there. And Dave is in his workshop, so it's cool to see all his collection. Today, last episode was episode 1, and we were learning to figure out how to use all the technologies. And so I apologize if we didn't do it perfectly, but we feel confident on this second episode. And today's episode is really what's the problem? And essentially where we landed was that there doesn't seem to be a pause. Dave, you described the sort of intention today of what we'll cover off, and then Ron and I will jump in.
Yeah, when we got into this, there were some things that we became aware of that happened and potentially impeded wise response. And some of those things led to a quicker knee-jerk kind of reaction without a pause. And so there were things like responding very emotionally to a situation, triggered, having our fears triggered. Quite often that would do something that would cause us to react quite quickly, as opposed to taking a pause and formulating or constructing a wise response. There are things that we've just learned to do. There are things that we've learned to do quite automatically, and that those are just sort of well-grooved reactions in our brains. Every time we see something, we react in the same way, and those are not necessarily full of reflection or necessarily serving us well either. So those sorts of things are what we're talking about, that going from stimulus to reaction very quickly, as opposed to going from stimulus to wise response after a pause. So that's the kind of thing that kind of triggered a lot of our investigation, both personally and what we were seeing in the world in terms of not necessarily thoughtful, enriched kind of responses, more knee-jerk reactions that didn't bring a lot of benefit necessarily.
Yeah. Ron, you add to the description or respond to what Dave was mentioning.
Yeah, I think, as we began to develop, our thoughts on this, they go back like 3 or 4 months, for me. And what I remember being at a family reunion, this summer. And of course, eventually some of us got talking politics. And, it was interesting. I mean, some people that had opinions had very well rehearsed opinions. And I found myself listening to them, but I was kind of hoping they would take a breath because they had their ideas so well memorized. There was no opportunity, actually for anybody to say anything else. I mean, they got to do their rant, and no one's going to be able to say anything until they stop talking. And sometimes it went on and on and on. So some of it was very knowledgeable, some very, very knowledgeable, well-practiced rants, if I may say so. But that's not wisdom. And I think that as we go along here, we'll be able to explain why that's not.
Yeah. I mean, when I think about some of the things that brought us to this focus on reaction, and we coined it wisdom. I reflect on my experience of being at beers with my buddies and hearing different opinions and wondering, first of all, how do I react or how should I respond without throwing fuel on the fire. I also was trying to figure out a way to be able to be engaged and participating in the conversation without just defaulting to already preconceived grooves. And so it's sort of like this right now in Canada and in Saskatchewan, we're in middle of the winter and there's really deep ruts. And so you can jump on down the lane and put yourself into the rut and take your hands off the steering wheel because it's so grooved. Well, I was finding in my conversations with whether it was a dinner party, whether it was a social function, whether it was a business function, recognizing that I found my responses were so grooved, I just fall into the rut and this is how I'd respond. And also I was recognizing that in others, and that they just defaulted to their old beliefs and their positions. So it was also really weighing on me. And then you look at our COVID experience, our disruption in political, the polarization, being against as opposed to for, and all the things that are going on. And it was figuring out the problem is how to respond. And what I think we came to was discovered the pause. But when we come back to the well-worn beliefs, I was looking at this more from my own perspective of what beliefs have I formed or have either misinformation or disinformation or bad information on that I was using as my response, both experience and knowledge and maturity to be able to have wisdom. And I was searching for wisdom. So the problem for me was the anxiety that created in me and the disruption in sort of my thought process. So jump in a little bit more on that, fellows. And, what we hope to do today is to be able to recognize what problem did we see. And at the heart of it, we've now 2 years later found out that there was a no pause, but there was other reasons why we started doing what we were doing. Ron, from your family reunion to my, events with my buddies and guests that you visited with Dave. So add to the party here.
Dave, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. For me, that idea of the habitual response and the well-worn grooves points to something that we've talked about a lot and that will come up through the various episodes. And that's the contextuality of wise response. So we get into this thing where, you see whatever it is, you see, a truck with a flag out the window, and you respond in a way in your mind through that well-worn groove. Whatever you believe about that is what really defines whether or not it is something that you understand or not. And just because you've had a reaction to something in the past that you thought was appropriate doesn't necessarily mean that you have appropriate response in this instance. So it's the contextuality of things that I think really is what makes one of those well-worn groove responses, those automatic responses without any thought. That's what makes that problematic, is that you're not necessarily taking into account another perspective, what this particular context is and its uniqueness. And so that's one of the challenges there.
Thinking about, since we first sort of stumbled on this or concluded together, the three of us, that the pauses were really important. I'm saying now it's been, as I think back, it's 4 or 5 months, that I know that I've been consciously aware of when there's not a pause, And
Yeah.
and so what I have found myself doing, including at dinner last night, Callie and I were having dinner with another couple. One of my surefire tactics is to just, if someone is going off on a rant, for example, is to find a way in through some thoughtful questions, like, not just what do you mean by that, but it's like, tell me a little bit more about what you're thinking. How did you come to that? The answers that someone might give you kind of clarify things for you, but it also, I find, slows them down.
Yeah.
And I guess it interrupts the pre-recorded message, if you will, of the rant, because I'm thinking of other conversations I've been in the last few months, where that it's a well-practiced complaint or gripe, or something that someone is angry with, and it's obvious that this is not the first time that they're saying it. It's not,
Yeah.
they're yeah, and trying to be tactical in the way that I ask questions all the time. I mean, I'm a natural question asker. I want to. That's one of the ways that I actively participate in a conversation is I get others to elaborate on what they're seeing or what they're thinking or how they're feeling, and it just makes for good conversation. But I think that when we're talking about anger and strong feelings and emotions like that, it can be you know it can be therapeutic as well, to sort of help people kind of calm down and reflect on their on what they're talking about.
I mean, what you're doing for me, Ron, is triggering memory of where we were in the past and, identifying what we were seeing as the problem was how people's action had a reaction for me. And I was trying to find ways to be able to act with more maturity or wisdom or knowledge. You know, it was the threat of dignity and our sense of self-worth and how to maintain that. But it was also about recognizing automatic responses in me or others where they just reacted with the knee jerk that we talked about. But it was also about applying some of our knowledge from the cognitive world and knowing that the amygdala hijacking. So when people do something, the trigger is either fight, flight, or freeze. And how do I productively respond in a mature way when somebody is waving an FU Trudeau flag or wearing a mega hat or something that would trigger a stimulus and the response. The other thing that is very important for me was recognizing the the requirement in all three of us to continue to search for knowledge and being wisdom explorers. And, what established a position, a principle in my world was the idea of a scotoma, the sensory blocking out of information that's there, that I act in accordance to the truth as I believe it to be, not necessarily the real truth. And what I was searching for was identifying where have I locked on to a truth that may not be true, and do I have the maturity and the wisdom to be able to be open to discovering. Uh, so, when we look at people that are the loudest in the room or seem to be the most knowledgeable in the room, but they don't present with wisdom, I was admiring, you, Ron, in your response to the world in sort of a patient, measured way to respond to things that for me were triggering. And in my world, the trigger would respond, not necessarily, it would be fighting inside of me or flighting inside of me, but I would actually act in a freeze, so I wouldn't know what to do. So if you're a listener and find some of this familiar to the problem, then what we discovered after several kitchen tables is that, our good friend Viktor Franko's building space between stimulus and response, and it discovered eureka was the pause. The pause matters, and it's what you do in between the stimulus and response, and do you act with experience, knowledge, maturity, and wisdom. And so for me, when you were talking earlier, Ron, just about your family reunion, that was a good story. Now, to enrich a little bit further, there's more to our story than just the space between stimulus and response, and there's more to our story than just the pause. And so over the next several podcasts or YouTube videos, we want to express here's a formula to be able to self-diagnose the issues, and to be able to have 4 constructs that can aid us in understanding what to do, because it's a do-it-yourself project. But it's also, and I loved your language on this, it isn't a passive pause, it's a constructive, active pause.
And I don't want to make light of the challenge. The pause is really hard to bring into your everyday life. There are things that are triggering. They trigger your fears. They trigger your emotions. And so it is very challenging. And I find it, my success rate is, not is far below 100%, maybe 50%. Who knows? Like, you get faced with these situations, and there's a cascade of brain chemicals and anxiety and all kinds of things that happen in these situations. And so it takes a lot of discipline and practice. And so far, I mean, you guys are better at it than I am, but I mean, I find that, you're in a situation that triggers your emotions, and it goes back to maybe a past negative experience. And, to say, oh, just pause and do the things that we're going to share, it's challenging. It takes a lot of work. And so I don't want to diminish the effort it takes and the commitment it takes to actually build towards more consistent, wise responses.
Ron, comments?
Yeah, what comes to mind for me is I'm thinking back again. The big deal, here in the States has been the presidential election, which happened last month, and I noticed that there was a lot of anxiety in both my wife and myself. And to put a better name on the anxiety was uncertainty. You didn't know who was going to win the election, and depending on your emotions around that. I mean, it had consequences for each of us in a different way, and so it's hard to be wise when you're waiting for the results of an election. But for most people, that didn't stop them from having opinions. And interesting to me is that after the election, people have continued, with their opinions and their rants, and as opposed to calling time out, taking a deep breath and saying, well, let's reorganize, the dominoes on the table here. What do I have to deal with now? What does reality look like now? a lot of people, they don't pause. They just keep ranting about what they were ranting about before the election, after the election. And so, I think when we're talking about pause, I mean, we're really helping people understand what we think is the constructive first step towards wisdom. You've got to sort of take a deep breath, and it's not just politics, but it's a lot of things in our life where we need to just take a deep breath and maybe put a little bit of time, into a pause that allows our deeper resources, our creative subconscious, for example, to sort of kind of come up with a different point of view. And I think again, just one final comment on sort of the anxiety and uncertainties, sometimes is that we'd like to be free of that, but sometimes, our opinions that we have, we're actually feeding that anxiety. And I think that that's a telltale sign that we're maybe not doing ourselves a favor. We're not on the right track, because if we continue to feel as nervous and as anxious as we had before, what's the good in that? And so anyway, those were my thoughts, Greg.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. Dave, anything more to add to that?
No, only that lately I've been trying to make as a habit the taking of perspective, trying to say, so I'm a terrible road rage guy. Like I just get so wound up on the road. But lately just trying to say, hey, yeah, I guess he just needs to get over into this lane because he's got to go somewhere. Or someone's, blowing by or right on your bumper behind. Oh, I think maybe must have to, get somewhere fast. Probably picking up a child, from daycare or something. Just that ability to try and channel other possibilities has been really helpful. So that I think is one of the ways that we start to move towards a pause and ask ourselves some questions, like you were saying earlier, Ron, about questions. Ask yourself some questions in the situation. So
Dave, what you brought up is a really good point about the practice and the practice of working at this. One of the things that we're going to cover off is how to apply. And I think it's one of the giftings that Lou Tice had given us was not just being a translator of complex information into knowledge, into wisdom, but the application of it. So to your point that you were making, I think is a good point, is that this is a do-it-yourself project, but the motivation is if this seems to be a problem for you, then here's some information that we hope will enlighten you and provide insight. And then we're really trying to be able to do is provide application.
Yeah, and we have a lot of practical tools that we've developed and have tried out in our own lives as we try to apply these rich strategies for creating a meaningful pause so that we can respond to any situation with wisdom. And so, yeah, while I say it's very difficult, there are also some practical things that we've come up with that I'm finding are quite helpful, like the practicing the capabilities of maturity and reflecting on our experience and what our triggers are and where they've come from the wisdom practice model, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, there's some practical advice that we can provide based on our experience and our exploration. It is challenging. It takes some work, but it's worth it.
Dave, when you were talking about the work that's required, I think this slide is intended to be able to show that we are trying to use stories and models and workouts and practices that you can apply. So it is a lot of work, but it's worth the effort. One of the things that we'll give a heads up to is when we talk about the pause, the pause is not just a passive pause, it's an active pause. And in that, we are going to offer over the next several episodes what we've discovered is what we call as the core wisdom formula. I won't reveal that, but then there's 4 constructs: the wisdom practice model, the wisdom to the third power, the SCARF model, and what I really love about work that you contributed to, Dave, specifically, is the 4 maturity capabilities. So on the next episode, we'll come and introduce the core wisdom formula. Summarize a little bit today, guys, on sort of, we started with the episode, the problem, and no pause was our answer. Add to that a little bit.
I think in the pursuit of wisdom, I mean, one of the real benefits of the pause is that there are some days, and in our case, there's some moments, the path forward is just not clear. It's I'm not quite sure what to do next, whether it's making a program like we're doing right now, or I don't know what the way next is with this couple that I had dinner with last night, because the conversation ended kind of badly, I thought, and somebody deserves an apology. I'm not sure who, after the dinner, but I think that it's not only a do-it-yourself project, but it's a one day at a time, kind of project, and that today we may not have sort of an answer, to what a strategic pause looks like, but tomorrow we may have a better picture of what that looks like. And so it's a work in progress, and as you guys have said before, it's an imperfect project, but think about what the end game is. The end game is peace of mind for yourself, for sure, but the end game is also, can you make the world a better place by how you interact with others and how you facilitate, an awkward conversation. That's progress is not necessarily an absolute win. It's a partial win, and so that is the sort of the name of the game. Is can we move everything forward?
Yeah. Just for those listeners, we just witnessed wisdom, and so well done, Ron. Dave?
I will come back to my earlier statement about this being a lot of work, which can sound daunting, but the benefit is great in that as you incorporate practices that enrich the pause between stimulus and response, I've experienced that I'm feeling better about my responses. I am more conscious of other people in those responses and the effect I'm having on other people. And as a result, I'm able to avoid awkward, apology dependent situations, and able to create hopefully more benefit through a response. And sometimes the wisest response is no response. That's another thing we found. But anyway, the idea is that there's a lot of benefit that you get from the work put in on this work that we've been doing.
Yeah. Well, thank you both. Next week, when we get together, next episode, when we get together, we're going to go deeper into the pause. What is the pause, and how does it address the problem? But we're going to introduce the core wisdom formula and the 4 constructs. So with that, we'll pause here and wish you well. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for joining us at the kitchen table today. We hope you're leaving with a few useful insights, and we'd love to hear from you. So please leave your comments and questions below. There's more to come, so we'll see you again. Be well.